Bonjour, this is Jasmine. Thank you so much for stopping to smell the roses on Rue Madame. For those of you who are new to the neighborhood, I am a writer, a storyteller, and a community builder. I write about culture, politics, parenthood, and my life here in France. And my blog is over on Patreon with short stories, articles, and podcasts. So check out the bonus content and full material over there. Sign up, become a patron, and support this passion project. So happy February, happy Black History Month to everyone. This video is a quick comparison between France and their Black history and the United States and our Black history. So in France, there is no official Black History Month. So that doesn't exist here. So it's a really quick video. And I got the impression, or I get the impression, that the teaching and the school system really don't focus on Black heroes, Black figures in the past or present. And you would think that they don't even exist, because I had to consult with my husband, who's French, and I asked him, like, growing up, did they have a period in their learning where they focus on non-white heroes, sheroes, leaders, personalities, significant figures in France? And his answer was no. And I thought that was very unfortunate, because we're raising our kids in the French system, and they are Black, and they do have a history that is strong and prominent, on my side at least, with the Black figures that we always put on the forefront this month. If it's Michael X or Rosa Parks or Harriet Tubman, or, we have a lot of figures and prominent leaders that we can raise our kids to admire and aspire to be similar to, as far as their conviction and the revolutionary changes that they did for the Black community, especially. But in France, that isn't really a thing. And I think it has a lot to do with their way of being, because even recently, the French president Macron had a big fuss and had not a scandal, but it was in the news recently, as far as how the French treat their or see their community, see their country as more of a universalist community. And it is a place where you don't focus on race, you don't focus on color, it's a really colorblind society, very colorblind. So you really do conform to the mainstream, which is the white dominant narrative. And the French president even patted himself on the back for that and thought that was the best thing. And he kind of scolded the United States on how, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he was saying that France isn't like a multicultural society. It's really universalism, driven. And he said, because I think maybe the former president, this was when Trump was in office, I believe, and how they had something to say about France and Macron. I think it had something to do with maybe it was the Gilets jaunes or something. No, I think it had to do with the Islam treatment recently, where it's constant. But there was something that happened, and I mentioned it on the channel. And his response to that was being hard on, or putting more pressure on the community, on the Islamic community, to reduce radicalization or something like that. Anyways, long story short, he was just very prideful and proud of their colorblind stance. And I think that shows in the curriculum too here. So there's no Black History Month, and you would think there was not even that didn't even exist. Like black people didn't even exist at that in the past. And they really do, like most countries, the United States included, they try to reduce the historical significance of their power and control and their oppression in their African colonies. And a lot of people use the term ancienne colonie, and ancienne colonie is like their former colonies, their former countries that they, for lack of a better term, enslaved and controlled. So they got their independence I think it was in the 60s. So it was like not that long ago. And just the treatment, the talk, and the behavior and the relationships between African countries, Francophone countries, or French-speaking countries are always very tense. And it still has that overreaching power that French is known for, which is very tangible, that, can't really be avoided, but it's not really talked about and openly discussed. So compared to the United States, where we have a Black History Month and we have this moment of recognition, even though Black history isn't in a vacuum, and it is not reduced just to the month of February. It's a year-long history lesson. And it's important, obviously, that we focus on always putting our history in perspective and with the other history of our country. But a lot of people even are kind of mixed on the fact that we even need a Black History Month. Like, it's all year round. We don't really need it. And blah, blah. And I get that point. And I understand that. But it's kind of like saying, why have HBCUs? And why have a BT? Or why have, you know what I mean? Like, we have it to highlight it. We have it because it's muted and whitewashed and constantly reduced or completely omitted. So to counteract that, we have Black History Month to never forget or constantly be reminded that it is a part of the global and national narrative. So I wanted to highlight a few Black personalities that are French speaking, but not necessarily French. And I already mentioned Alexandre Dumas and his father, who was a general in the French army. I think he was part of the French Revolution. And those are two. But the father was of mixed heritage, so he descended from slavery, but his father was a Frenchman, so a white man. And then his son was, even less, fully Black, I guess. So now I asked my husband again, because I'm like, does anybody really know that Alexandre Dumas, who was a famous writer in France, who responsible for the Three Musketeers? I'm sure a lot of people know the Three Musketeers. So he wrote that. But my husband said, no, I'm sure a lot of people don't know. He has a great grandmother who was Black, but he's considered as white as anybody because it's not, like I said, Black culture, Black elevating the Blackness in the country isn't a thing because everybody is just French. So he's just another Frenchman to the French society and French historians, even though he does have that heritage in him. And then there's another one. It's Toussaint Louverture. He is the general and leader of the Haitian Revolution, which I didn't really get a lot of information on that I can remember growing up in history class, which wasn't very interesting to begin with. But I just had to admit, we didn't really get a thorough history lesson. We didn't even get a thorough history on our own country, so let alone one in France. But since living here and since studying here and since having kids here and all of that, I've become really knowledgeable, or at least interested in that part of history in general, the connection between the blacks here and their liberation story and the colonies. Because my husband's family, they are from Martinique, and Martinique is a former colony, but is today France. So it's a former colony, but it is France still. And they have a long history of slavery and oppression, all of that. But in the history books, it's not detailed. It's not seen as a priority or important, since French history is so long and robust. You know what I mean? But I remember having a conversation with a friend, a former colleague's husband. So my former colleague, she was English speaking because we were at a school together teaching, and her husband happened to be French, like my husband. So we, had a friendship and had a lot of things in common, since we were both from somewhere else and came here and got married here. Anyway, so I remember one day I had dinner at her house or something like that, and her husband was recounting a story that happened to him when he was in the United States. He used to live there. They used to live there at one point, and he was saying how it was so sad that Americans in general knew very little about Europe and French history. And I was thinking, okay, why should we? I mean, you know what I mean? Why should that be something we should just know off the back? But he was telling me about a story about him going to a doctor. And this is in the United States. He went to the doctor, and the doctor was surprised that he was black and French. And that stuck with him, apparently, because everybody he met from the United States, he would tell this story to, oh my God, how could a doctor get all the way up to doctor status, you know what I mean, all that schooling, and not know just basic history of colonization and slavery, and the reason there is a lot of black people in Europe in general, especially in England and in France. And he was just so adamant about that and thought, Americans are so stupid and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stereotypes that go with that. Anyways, and I understood his point. I really did. And, you don't know things until you know what I mean? But I was hesitant to say, I think that has more to say about the American schooling system or the American education, more so than the doctor. You know what I mean? Even I've had relatives come to France, and they're all I didn't know there were so many black people here. It was just something they didn't expect. But like I said, it is our education, and I don't think people are just gonna wake up and go on Google and say, oh, let me just see if black people are in France, and let's just learn about the history. If it's not taught to you, And if you're not interested in it, or, have no inkling to like find out this specific thing, you're not going to know. So I think it was a little unfair of him to just blanketly say, oh, Americans are stupid for not knowing this history. And I think a little arrogant too for him to be like expected of this, of France, like out of all countries. But the relationships with France and Africa, since, Cameroon, Senegal, Benin, and a lot of countries in Western Africa was colonized by France. There is a Black history. There is that. But like I said, it is of no relevance to the French overall. Back to the United States. I see a lot of people online wishing people a happy February and asking the question, like, what are we going to do this month? Are we going to organize? Are we going to do something specifically, like have a blackout month or something like that, where you just only shop Black, or you don't shop at these big monopoly companies. So it's a lot of dialogue that I like to see. Unfortunately, it happens only this month normally. But since the recent, Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that, I think it's more frequent. So that's a good thing. But there was this one thing that kind of irked me. I know it's going to sound funny or a little odd, but I saw a picture or a painting or like a montage, a collage of Martin Luther King Jr., Kamala Harris, and Barack Obama. And I don't know why that kind of just didn't seem right. Like, comment below if you know what I'm going to say before I say it. I just think it is an injustice to compare a politician to a social activist. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I think it's an insult to Martin Luther King Jr. to have Barack Obama and Kamala Harris as to be in the same group. They're all Black. That's probably the most they have in common. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong. Barack Obama, historic, first Black president. Kamala Harris, first Black vice president. They're in a whole camp by themselves. But their agenda wasn't a Black agenda. You know what I mean? Like, they're more of a universalist, those, Barack and Kamala, and there's nothing, nothing wrong with that, I guess, depending on who you ask. But there's nothing wrong with that. You're a universalist. You want everything to be, hunky-dory for everybody. That's fine. And you're more for the people. Just like Barack Obama said, it's not, I'm not the president of Black America, or I'm the president of the United States of America, or something like that. And that was, perfectly said. But Martin Luther King Jr. wanted harmony, wanted peace, wanted justice, wanted you to be judged on the content of your character and not the color of your skin, all of that. But Martin Luther King Jr. had a Black agenda specifically, not because he thought Black Americans were better. He didn't think Black Americans were superior. He just knew that Black people needed a movement and needed to be put out front because they are the last to be considered. Just like, the Black Lives Matter slogan or theme. Not that all lives don't matter, because we want all people to live and thrive and have a happy life. but Black Lives Matter is necessary because they're killing black people. They're killing black people. So, but on the other hand, Barack Obama and Kamala Harris, they don't have a black agenda. Therefore, they're for everybody agenda, and that's fine. But Martin Luther King Jr. was a revolutionary figure. He was for upsetting and challenging and resisting the system, not being a part of it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being part of it and trying to do what you can with the positions that you have and climbing the corporate ladder like Kamala Harris did. To each his own. She is very successful in her own right, but she is a cop at the end of the day. You know what I mean? She's a cop at the end of the day that became the vice president. Let's give her flowers. Let's give her kudos. Whatever you want to give her, fine. She deserves it. But you can't compare a district attorney or whatever she was to a civil rights activist, leader, icon who was water hosed and who had dogs sicked on them and who was essentially being civilly disobedient to police officers. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, you can't compare a Malcolm X or a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Harriet Tubman or or Rosa Parks, any of that, to elected officials who essentially have to support the status quo to some degree and to uphold white supremacy to some degree. Like, you can't compare Barack Obama, even though I appreciate Obama for what he did, love his wife, but he was responsible for, the drone strikes, not responsible for the war, but, he has critics for using drone strikes and continuing death abroad and the bombing of brown folks abroad. Again, that is his job. I'm not going to critique him for doing his job, but you can't also put him next to Martin Luther King Jr., who was against war. You can't do that. So that's why it bothered me, like, putting Martin Luther King Jr., who was more of a socialist than anything else, who was against war, against capitalism, against all of these things, and then put him next to Kamala Harris and Barack Obama, who was successful in their own right, as I said before, but is not like a black agenda revolutionary figures. They're not. So I don't know. I just think there should be two bags. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think the activists that are on the streets who are fighting and, risking their lives with, like, tear gas and rubber bullets and death, essentially, by police officers, they can be put up, probably not on the same pedestal, probably not to the same degree, but they can go in the bag with a Martin Luther King Jr. You know what I mean? But, the president who, has all this security, who has taxpayer dollars protecting him, and he has white people, black people supporting him. There's people paid to protect his life. You know what I mean? You can't compare that to Martin Luther King Jr., who didn't have a secret service and who died for a cause and who was assassinated for this cause, which is specifically the black agenda. That's why he was killed. It wasn't because he wanted black kids and white kids to live in harmony. Everyone wants that. So I don't think he was killed for that. He was killed because he had a black agenda. He had a poor man's agenda to lifting up poor people out of, their situation, not a Wall Street friendly president and a cop vice president. Again, respect for the two, but it's just, let's just be more respectful to like comparing that. Tell me if you agree. So in summary, France, no Black History Month. The United States, we have a long ways to go, but I'm very, very proud that we do have a Black History Month. And, it's hard to say, but you can't really compare the two countries. Like I said, the history is very, very different with the colonization and the, old colonies of France. You can really compare more so France with England, because England has that imperial totalitarian, control over Africa more or less to the same degree as France. And therefore, their history, hence their Black history, is, intrinsically tied with the mother continent compared to the United States, which is more of a modern civil rights movement. And then you go back to slavery with the revolutions of Nat Turner and things like that. So we have that history that's more documented and more prevalent, and there is a bigger population of descendants of Africa in the United States. So we it's not really a good comparison. But as I mentioned before, there are many French or French-speaking Blacks from France that need more recognition. But I'm going to continue this conversation over on Patreon. So head over there, make a pledge, and we can get further into the discussion. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.